but I think one thing I'm interested in is not a Drupal module, but Together.js, which Mozilla is publishing, and it uses just a snippet of JavaScript. You can drop all sorts of amazing real-time collaboration stuff into basically any web app. So it's something you should check out for sure. Cool, ready to start?
Recording already.
All right, so some of you may have been here last time I spoke. Maybe show of hands who was here. Actually, you were here. Yeah, so this is, back then I promised a bit of an update on how we were doing. So this is the update, but I may actually wind further back than the last meetup in order to tell a little bit more of a story. So I'll try to talk for less than 5 minutes, hopefully, and then I'll get Matt and Alex to talk. But obviously, Rick and Rishma and Brian have all had a hand recently or throughout the year. So if you've got something to add in, just pipe up. Okay, so CollabForge, we are a consultancy here in Melbourne specializing in scalable collaboration. So how do you get from small groups to very large numbers of people collaborating? How do you do Wikipedia on purpose in other contexts? So naturally, our jobs tend to include a technology component, but we're not necessarily a technology shop. So our approach to actually delivering technology has kind of flexed and flowed over the years. It hasn't always been possible for us to, say, have a shop in-house, so we've just had a lot of different approaches depending on the project, more or less. But we've always used open source software, and I think we were one of the first firms really driving open source into government in Australia. And in a sense, what we've seen through our almost 100 projects now is certain patterns emerge that we're delivering over and over again. And it's kind of this catch-22 always going, geez, it would be really great if we could just get the technology done cheaper, because the work we're passionate about, it tends to be actually more on the people and the strategy and the kind of making things happen. And we want to be able to kind of give that capability to our clients. So something like a Drupal distribution has always seemed to make sense. We've used Drupal a lot over the years. In the early days, it was more Twiki because we had a lot of wiki-based work. But so in a sense, what this presentation is about is CollabCo, which is our sort of aspirational Drupal distribution that's kind of come together over the last year. And so I'll talk a bit about that, and then I'll get Matt and Alex to kind of get more into the nuts and bolts. So hopefully that you get more of that Drupal nitty-gritty goodness from this. So to give you an idea of the kinds of work that we do, we got a call. We've done policy wiki crowdsourcing basically in the past. It started in the city of Melbourne, but here's a site with the government of Alberta in Canada, and they were doing their first ever social policy framework, and the minister said, I want to do that in a wiki, and they said, okay. And so they Googled around, and they found that we had done wiki policy work before. So it's a simple Drupal site. Using the book module, we get this outcome of sort of having a multi-page parent-child kind of document, and then each of those pages has, and so we visualized it as a tree, which people think is kind of really an easy way to parse a complex policy document. And each page is a node with a revision history, and so you can see this is the vision page within that whole strategy. There's one page dedicated to the vision, and so you can see that you actually have the citizens of the community debating and editing what the vision statement should be. And so a lot of the recent posts are from the social policy team, but this is someone from a particular nonprofit, I think. This is just a couple, Jane Taxpayer, who logged in and made her edits. Any social policy must have dignity to all citizens. And so this was just part of their engagement. They had all the face-to-face stuff, and they had all the stuff on the ground. If you click through all this stuff on the left here, they've got a great blog with the minister blogging. They've got toolkits that people could download to host conversations about social policy in Alberta. And they have published all of their findings and learnings and data back up to the site for people to kind of explore. So they got a lot of kudos for this, and they sort of expanded this approach to 3 other sort of sub-strategies that fell out of the policy framework. And we were working with SoftwareWorks, formerly Powerful CMS at this time, to help develop this. And we went with a kind of a multi-site build so that they could share user accounts and stuff. So that's that's probably been the thing that's been most unique to our work, is this use of wiki books to crowdsource strategic documents or policy documents, either internally to organizations or externally. And that's something that the market really hasn't shown up and delivered. No one, it's something that I think, for example, could be made more accessible. And I think the thing for us is that in terms of CollabCo, which you'll see is maybe similar to Drupal Commons or to Open Atrium, what we found is that those are sort of for collaboration, maybe, but they're not actually based on like a theory or an understanding of how collaboration grows and scales. So we think that there's room to develop a distro, or at least some apps or features or something which can be integrated into other sites, which have a little bit more of that nous and that understanding of how collaboration works. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So where I came into this meetup last year was we had just been, we were about a few months into a project with the Department of Industry in the federal government around something called the Industry Innovation Network. And without going into too much detail, they were creating 10 new organizations, all of whom would have membership and private collaboration and groups and knowledge bases. And basically the brief was that we needed to create 11 new websites, each with similar feature sets, but different depending on what those organizations wanted, that all needed to talk to each other and all needed to be updatable and manageable centrally. And so that was a really big challenge, and we initially were working with someone in the US, and that wasn't quite working, and then if you'll remember, we were working with a fellow named Raph, who was helping us out at that time, and from there we started to really build up a bigger team, and that's when Rick and Reshma and Alexar and Matt all started kind of joining the team that we were working with locally. At the time, and then partly because of some of the discussions we had in this meetup, we ended up going, we had a big discussion about deployment. So could this be done with Aegir? Am I saying that right? No one's going to say it right. Does it need to be done with, or does it need to be done with more of like a Jenkins kind of custom system to support that? And so we ended up going with a Jenkins-based approach, and probably these guys can talk more about it. And then what happened is, because of the change of election, only 2 of the organizations ever ended up getting created, and there was a lot of chaos, and so no one ever really understood what we were doing, and so we ended up only building 2 sites. But one of them in particular, so this is a site which is now being hosted by the government, they've taken it over, and which was kind of the front porch for an innovation thing, so most of our energy was going as well into sort of hosting events and that sort of thing. Another one of the sites was, and this is actually just a WordPress front end, but one of the organizations that was created was the Manufacturing Innovation Precinct. And their job was to bring together or their strategy was to bring together the top 500 manufacturing firms in Australia and bring the CEOs into a collaborative space to kind of form up new collaborations, like around new materials for aviation or around new applications of 3D printing in the manufacturing process. And so they've actually turned out to be the best users of the platform that we created for this project, which was called CollabCo, basically. And they are basically using it to have discussions with CEOs, and to then, out of those discussions, the CEOs go, we should really establish a collaboration hub around new materials in aviation, and then they go in and they share files, and they have conversations, and they form up ideas for specific projects, and then they take those and throw a bunch of money at them, basically, and build new things, and hopefully make Australia a more competitive country internationally. So that's possibly one of the most interesting applications of this, and they're sort of still ticking along, trying their best to move their thing along despite the change of government. Just trying to remember my thread. So that story kind of wrapped in March for us when the contract ended, even though the story is still kind of going along for Meta. I think one of the interesting things about the way it was developed with them is that we're developing it for CEOs, so they're extremely time poor, very busy, and they really hate the internet. And so the feedback we kept getting, we had a really great contact over there, who the feedback we kept getting was take that out, take that out, take that out. And so it was a real innovation by subtraction kind of approach. And so a lot of websites which are designed to be sticky and kind of put lots of details to kind of keep you there, this is the opposite. This is the minimum on every page. And I think that's actually really been helpful from an inclusiveness perspective for us to think about. We want to be able to have an inclusive platform for the older users out there who maybe don't care about the cool stuff. So the food precinct is the other one. They're mainly using this just as a front site. And so since then, we've decided to kind of take our, to take the platform and use it for our own purposes. And so what we've decided as a firm is that collaboration should be a capability that everybody has. And it's not something that just happens. It's something that's hard, that you have to learn, and it's something that you can get better at. And we believe that all the people that are working on collaboration out there in the world should be actually pooling their knowledge about collaboration to build kind of a shared library. So we've taken kind of an install of CollabCo and launched this Epic Collaboration initiative as a way to bring together practitioners around collaboration. So we've had a couple of events already. And essentially the kind of part of it is that we've added this library, which is just quite simple. There's 4 types of nodes: stories, so what are the actual stories of collaboration? So here's an example of one. The Fight for the Reef campaign, I don't know if any of you saw this actually happen, where they were trying to get UNESCO to censure the Australian government. So we got Stephen Johnson, who was one of the lead campaign designers, to tell a story about how he brought all the teams together to design that campaign in just 2 days. So you can read that story here on epiccollaboration.com. And the idea is that all of these stories about collaboration will have sort of fundamental patterns that emerge from them. And that's how we can start to draw out a sort of science of collaboration by surfacing this data in this way. So one that was that he made them turn off their cell phones. So be present is one of the patterns. And so here's just a really simple pattern about being present, and then it links potentially to other case studies and frameworks that express that pattern. So it's this way of, instead of saying, here's the way to do collaboration, it's more, let's see what the data shows. We're also, because this is such a big job, we're driving it as Cloud Porch at the beginning, but we're trying to bring lots of partners along. So we're keeping this blog about our journey of learning and about how we're bringing people along. And that's, in a sense, is kind of the ideal use, we think, for this platform, is that you start small, you scale up, you work openly, and you bring people along. Just a couple other things that to show this. So in the library, in resources, there's this. One of the projects is kind of an open curriculum for collaboration, which is under development. We had one workshop. But the idea is trying to create this kind of open practical guide for scaling any collaboration. And so this is another example of using the book module for Wiki. So we've got 6 sections here. Each one of those is a node, just like before. And I think probably the last thing I wanted to show was, in this part of the site, we're not using this with anybody yet, but this is a version of what the meta people are using. So the user has a dashboard, activity feed, where the activity appears. There's none on this site. And then they can kind of, we can put anything here to help them track their activity across different aspects of the site. You know, community manager can push special notices or push news out, that kind of stuff. And then groups, I think I opened up. So this is a sample group. So you just get this kind of group page. There's open and closed groups. We did a really complex workflow for the meta people around draft groups and groups that are published that these guys can maybe talk about. This idea that it's hosted by a particular person in a particular organization in mass collaboration contexts. That's what you're having, is you're having lots of organizations come together. So it's not something you always see. And then, you know, inside here you have discussions and you have your library kind of within the group space. It's a similar kind of design pattern that you'd see in a Drupal Commons or an Open Atrium, that you just have the apps within the groups as well as outside the groups. And wikibooks inside the groups as well. So it's kind of where we're at, and where we are is that the big project that really kind of drove a lot of heavy development around this has sort of stalled, and there's still a little bit of development pumping along. in the meantime, we're sort of slowly building it up, using it for ourselves, and looking for those next opportunities, which are going to continue to drive it, looking at some grants, thinking about what's the long-term kind of livelihood of something like this. Is this something the world needs? Is this something that people would be interested in using in their own context? Is this going to save any of you any time to use this as opposed to using something else? And can we find any new problem owners who want to kind of come in and give it a shot and drive into the comical resource of the distribution? But for us, it's not something we have enough resources to kind of throw at overcoming some of those baseline challenges, I think. So we're going to be looking for partners and that sort of stuff. I've probably talked too long now, so I might let Matt and Alex have a bit of a say.
Sure. Well, I didn't really come here with any sort of agenda to talk about. I just thought I'd sort of leap off things that sort of stuck out from what Hailey was saying. So I'm just curious, because I'm only sort of new to Drupal, relatively speaking. Does anyone here who uses sort of a deployment process not use Agar for deploying? Because like, what generally do people use?
What I generally use is Equi's one for my bigger clients, and
Right.
basically I scale that with the projects and some custom scripts to basically small sites.
Okay. Well, what we ended up going with was Jenkins, which to me, from the outset, sort of being new to Drupal and still, yeah, it felt very clunky. So what I'm looking at doing now with Epic Collaboration, now that we don't really have so much of a pressing need to push out new features, is moving back into seeing what Agar can do for us. So that'll be interesting to see where that goes. One discovery I sort of found about midway through the project with this CollabCo sort of software was that the functionality is good, but I think the UX, the user experience, and the design really added an immense amount to the value of the product. We saw the work of a colleague who had some really good functionality, but it just felt unusable. And if you've got something that's unusable but has a lot of functionality behind it, it's just not going to be used. So I think that was one big learning that we had. And you can sort of see that here. It's just, it sort of has a bit more of a, I was looking at Dries' website last night, and it felt very 2004-ish. Maybe I'm just being a design snob. Yeah, but there goes a new feature. But his website's absolutely great. Yeah, no, I don't know. I think that this really sort of brought it alive. You could see how this could just be text and links, and yeah, I think that's a big thing for us.
Yeah, that was Laura Summers.
Yeah,
who did a lot of the really great shout out to Laura, and she hadn't really touched Drupal before this job, but she just came in and worked closely with Alexander and Richmond and everyone else, and kind of made some stuff work.
Yeah, just a bit of a testament as well to how easy Drupal is to theme and all that sort of thing. I don't really think of anything else to talk about it. Maybe yeah, Alex, if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm thinking of. Are you happy this time?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking of. You can go closer to the computer just because that's where it's recording audio. Okay. I was thinking of 3 different things. When we were developing this thing, we faced problems. One of the problems was the different looking, totally different than what a Drupal website looks like, because the guys who were designing wireframes and everything didn't have Drupal in mind, which was good, I think. And so we had to make it and so we did a lot of changes, which was so hard for especially our designer, front-end developer, was coming from WordPress world. Everything is easy in a template file, and she was sort of, yeah. Yeah, and that was one challenge. And the other one was about organic groups, OG. The functionality they asked, the client wanted, was sort of in sometimes totally different than organic groups. So we had to do a very high, very tense development of organic group. which is nice. At first opportunity, we will, I think, will publish it, make it public. And the other thing is for deployment process. Our DevOps guys was coming from somewhere out of Drupal, and he was pushing that everything should be through code and through the deployment process, which made everything so hard. Actually, we couldn't make it. I don't know how the other guys are working with Drupal 7, how are they making everything in code, which is possible, but because of the pressure, we couldn't do that. We ended up with having database snapshot as part of integration, and yeah, that was what we ended up. And I'm so curious to know how different, how the other teams are using without database snapshot, or maybe everyone is using database snapshot. But seems to be Drupal 8 seems to not use configs in database, so everything would be easier. Yeah, that's all. I think
deployment was really the story of this job in a sense, because I don't think anything we did was too brand new. But except for maybe that workflow that you were talking about, basically the client wanted a really robust workflow around the user proposes a group, the community manager and the user work together to shape up the group, and then it's in draft status during that time, and then it moves where it's available only to that user and to the community manager, and then to any other co-owners of the group that they invite in, and then it moves from draft status into published status. And so that was way different than you could do with published, unpublished, or whatever. So yeah, that's probably enough talking from our side. Yeah. Questions?
Other than the organic groups pane, did you find anything in Drupal that just really made it just really hard? Like you found it, did you find yourself battling against Drupal in order to implement some of the functions?
Yeah, I think the biggest one we had was with using Jenkins just to deploy new work that had been done. I think there was a lot of work that needed to go into just featurizing everything. And because I'm not entirely sure, but I think because we had so much custom work done to sort of add the functionality that the client required, that's sort of where we headed butts with having a robust sort of deployment process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we came in, there was things that could have been in features that weren't, which were probably making it hard for you to deploy, because when you revert features or if the changes got made the wrong way, then they weren't actually properly.
Were you using that?
When we did features stuff, that's how we do our deployment process, is hook up that in with features. But
yeah, I think it would have, if we had had one consistent development team from the beginning, it would have worked. I think probably a big part of the story was changing in midstream. So.
What components specifically were you struggling to export? And
I think it was the actual ability to export and import it. It was that they didn't start off doing a features-based deployment before getting new features. They were doing database backups and things like that, and then trying to get it all featureized took time while they were still trying to push out new features at the same time. So it would have been much easier for them to stop, capture everything they had at the moment into features properly, and then continue development, but they didn't have the time to do that.
Yeah, the authorizing environment, as we say in government parlance, was not really interested in agile or things like stopping and consolidating code. So it's a really challenging job from a political perspective.
I'm interested to know if you've had a chance to compare against Atrium and Commons, and where you could see similarities with those, and more interestingly, differences with that.
I mean, I've worked with Atrium probably and Commons in the past on past jobs. I don't know where they've gotten to now. I know that Atrium has gotten quite sophisticated in terms of the theming and layout and some of that stuff. And my sense with Atrium is that there's just a lot of, software in a sense, like a lot of the beauty of it is, right, is that it sort of bakes in some processes so that you can do things faster. And I feel like Atrium has just a lot of assumptions around being an intranet and being for kind of a closed, secure community, similar to say like a gamer, where it isn't sort of built for that level of openness. I know that's like a really vague, non-specific answer.
No, I actually think that's a really useful answer.
Yeah.
It seems to be quite separated, but the groups are quite separate. There's no aggregate.
Yeah, there's no, the metaphor that I often use is that if you go to a conference, you have a plenary, and you have breakout spaces, and it's about how that knowledge flows between the plenary and the breakouts that kind of makes the collaboration scale. And yeah, Atrium doesn't really have a plenary. The other pattern that we see is that the clients want an integrated experience all the way out to their front page. And so it needs to, it's almost like that, it's that level of openness and engagement that's like from the moment they touch the front page and seeing the content that's potentially bubbling up from the groups to be displayed on the home. And Atrium kind of puts the ball there. I think Commons is a little bit more friendly on that front, but Commons on the flip side, I think, has. Okay.
This one has something from Commons and something from Atrium, but we couldn't use another term because, for example, Commons has some assumptions, which is not exactly what we do here, especially in terms of closed groups and this sort of stuff, and some custom views, which is not useful, but flags what's useful. We implemented again here. And Stewart had a talk in some meetup, I remember, not to use your new project based on Commons. It's not a good practice.
It's hard to use distribution as a base for something that is essentially something.
Yeah, because they have their own assumption and you change it.
And if they change the way they do things, you can potentially have to rework your entire website.
Yeah. But there are good, very good examples. So you can look at the code, the way they're doing things, and use it in your own.
I mean, I mentioned that there's some core modules that all three of them are using, but I think what you said about the logic that people do, the assumptions about the way people should collaborate are also baked in, and those assumptions, and are you doing anything like that in those assumptions?
Yeah, I'd say another sort of set of assumptions is that collaboration is about project management. So you get a big focus on calendars and tasks and scheduling. It's like, there's so many great apps for that, and people have their own like history with that. That when you build a community site trying to bring a network of people together who haven't worked together before, when it's time for them to go do work, let them go and use productivity apps that they want to use, and that what the network space is for that act of shaping up ideas together and achieving common understanding and shared vision. And it's a different set of activities, and I don't think that if you don't have a robust theory of collaboration, then it's hard that you don't separate the two very clearly. And then the other thing I think in all of this is that maybe we don't need a distro, maybe what we need is just some really good apps, and just starting to get across that kind of new way of doing Drupal, or maybe just a good set of features. Sorry, it's kind of giving me a funny look, because I don't know what I'm talking about, and I probably don't.
But no, that's actually a really interesting area, isn't it? And maybe you're like arriving at a difference between what is someone's job, and they might use their company intranet every day, deep storage over a long period. It needs that wider range of functionality and that depth and what have you. And it's very kind of intranet-y. Yeah. And some of the distros you were talking about really do that perfectly.
Yeah.
But then maybe there's a difference between your job and your intranet, and then what is running a campaign, or what is doing a shorter-term collaboration, and maybe there's some really good directions towards that there, where it doesn't have to be as deep or as comprehensive. You don't need to tick off all of that range of functionality, but you need to nail some of it and make that really elegant and really kind of enjoyable for, say, people quickly throwing ideas together and reaching consensus and stuff like that. And you were talking about CEOs talking with each other about documents or processes. Is there a mechanism for consensus in there?
Well, a mechanism for consensus, I mean, is there a mechanism for consensus anywhere? You know what I mean? Like that's...
Well, that's interesting, because I think the way that they the client arrived at sort of some form of the consensus was through their use of the groups or the hubs. So people would talk a bit, and because these are like some corporate sort of big wig CEO people, they were like, well, we can't just talk all the time, we have to actually have outcomes. And so we would talk in the discussions, and then if something started to emerge, the idea was we'd move into a group, and there'll be a focused discussion on the idea. And then what I think they wanted to do, but I'm not entirely sure, was move into projects.
Yeah, so I think their mechanism for consensus was a leadership model, was that so there would be a discussion, a need would be surfaced, and then the community manager would go, okay, so there's a need, who's going to take the ball and run with it? So it's very suited to their culture to have that kind of leadership model. So I think that point you said where, the way I framed the previous point is that the technology needs to evolve with the growth of the community. And that's one of the reasons why we were really keen to get the features easy to like turn on and off, in a sense. And that's something I know that Commons doesn't do particularly well. It's like, I don't want the calendar, but it's really hard to kind of hide that. It doesn't want to. And so that's something that was a design principle from the beginning. I don't know if we quite got there, but that's kind of where I was going with that apps thing. So with Epic Collaboration, no one can even log into that right now. We're only exposing the library and the blog to the community and a few other pages. And that's strategic as much as anything. And then once we do have login, it'll probably just be, we'll add one more thing, like a discussion. We won't even roll out groups until later. You know, it's about that, not overwhelming people with all the features just because you can.
There's another option, feature distribution, distribution, and it's the module called apps.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like features that you have an installation process. So that's why you create like a core feature, and then you install it, and then you ask a bunch of questions about what you want to use that feature for on this particular site. I don't know which road it's gone, but yeah.
I haven't really heard much about it since.
Yeah, they were trying to actually
Chicago. So yeah.
I think it was maybe 3 days ago that I first time stumbled across that. Hailey came to my desk and she's like, hey, look at this could work for us. It's like, huh, okay, and I just read through it and I'm like, I'm not sure, maybe, I haven't really looked much more into it. It sounds interesting, I mean, it's maybe you recommend those.
I think if you can separate the functionality well enough, it could be just a suite of modules that turn on
Yeah.
Which could be features.
Yeah, my sense is that this is an area where Drupal still, there's some maybe waiting around for 8, or like, I don't really know.
I think there's always going to be lots of ways to skin package.
Yeah.
So I always say there's like 10 ways to do something in Drupal, so yeah, why not invent number 11?
Yeah.
It's interesting. You were talking about deployment of the code base across environments and this type of thing, and you mentioned a couple of methods that you've had already, Jenkins and Vagrant. You were working with Vagrant or not so far?
They're using Vagrant for development,
right.
So for the developers to do their work on,
so
which we actually didn't. So the reality of it was involved in some of this development, and at that stage they were still developing the Vagrant setup, and for us it was too unproductive, so we just used Ada on our local machines. And we're
ended up creating a lot of blockers. People really struggled to get Vagrant up, and then as Brian said, the Vagrant environment was constantly
spent like a day, and I'm just like, I could have set this up in Aga in a couple of minutes, so we just did that.
Yeah,
we still pushed to Git fine, so it didn't matter.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there are lots of shops that struggle with those Vagrant setups, and even even the most experienced developers contributing to those code bases, long phases in alpha and beta versions and things that aren't working for them either. But then there are shops that have nailed a really sweet Vagrant setup and just use that as their constant workflow, local to production and everything. And that's great when that happens. It's Godel I'm thinking of. I've had a really good run with Vagrant, for example. But what I was going to say though, so there are lots of ways to push between environments. There's Chef as well. So I mean, you could check out AWS. Opsworks is a really nice way of getting your AWS stack all lined up nicely, and then using Chef to play in there. And that's one you can build yourself. And then Acquia is worth a close look at how they do that environment management, just pushing to repos and this type of thing. And that's all moving the code base. Then it seems like part of what you want to do is move content between sites or not. That doesn't come up for you.
No, it's just that at that stage they had a lot of the configuration just in the database still. Right. So it was probably push stuff around.
So that's the whole features kind of
thing. Yeah, it's proper config management that they're trying to do.
So it wasn't a part of the features that caused the problems. Some of the core configuration.
It wasn't the features that was causing the problem, it was the history of the project at that point.
There were some struggles with features, though, as I remember correctly, with it being...
That's getting your head around how to use features and separate them cleanly.
Yeah. There are some
dropping out and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. There are some parts of features, like depending on where the configuration is coming from. If it was created using CTOol stuff, then it was really easy and it was always encoded, or it knew about that. Whereas something like transporting a node type in features can be a pain sometimes because it's in the database, naturally in the database. And you sort of got a copy and code that you sort of deploy to it every now and then. It's not really straight.
Well, we still run into issues with the order that some things happen, so we have to do a feature revert as part of like doing a site install using features to make a distribution, and the last step of the installation is do a feature revert. Because there's like some bit of configuration that's happening at the wrong time, that sort of thing. That's why we're all waiting for Drupal.
Anyone else who didn't get a chance to kind of ask something burning on their mind? Any other question? I'll just read that after a while. You'll let us know? Okay.
Well, I don't remember when we actually started, but we should let me do this presentation as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, and it strikes me that there's still a huge conversation that people want to have around deployment and stuff. So that might be a great topic for someone to do. Yeah.
Well, sounds like an open discussion type of thing. Yeah. More than which I'm happy to do.
Did you have any questions from Lady first?
I've never heard of Jenkins. I was going to ask what that was.
The thing is that
it's like a butler for your server.
It's a heavy
basically does things when things happen.
Sure.
So say I push the commit to Git, then I want to deploy those changes to my service.
Okay.
there was a requirement, I think, that we needed to just use open source and use our own servers, and that made us a bit limited. Yeah, we couldn't use just these AWS and all these amazing things.
Yeah. Eight is open source.
Pardon?
8 is open source.
We made a choice not to use AWS as well.
Can I slip in a last question?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about Azure? Have you interacted with it? Do you like it?
I did? No, just a few years ago. I'm not looking at that.
Have you checked out Chef scripts for deployment?
We use Chef as part of this.
I think
we need Bernard here because Bernard was the ops guy that was really driving it.
But, yeah, I think one interesting learning from that was with hiring sysadmins, it's always good for them maybe to have just the tiniest drop of Drupal knowledge, and that they can sort of, not paying that hints at all, but I think it's definitely a big value proposition to have a sysadmin who knows a bit of Drupal, and that way they can sort of make decisions that would complement the developers and not anything.
Puppet is the other one.
Yeah.
Sorry, is Chef, yeah.
I built my career on that. That's what I did.
Yeah.
Drupal savvy sysadmin.
I get it. Ah, good to know.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.